Thank you very much, and good morning. Yes, as this indicates, it's one of the few talks at the symposium which isn't a broad overview. It's actually an attempt to explain how did we translate an action plan and take it from the shelf and make it real. And what I hope to do today in the 20 minutes is to highlight some areas of the action plan, some of our successes, and some of our aspirations for the future. And hopefully there'll be some elements in this that might be useful and of interest to others. And I'm going to start with the working hypothesis. And one of the reasons I'll spend just a little bit of time on this is because it's actually common to every action plan on AMR anywhere in the world. In fact, we're probably in the midst of an AMR plandemic, where everybody's got a plan. But they are all fundamentally the same. So I'm going to look at the working hypothesis. I'm going to look at the strategy we adopted, the tactics we employed, and where possible, give some animal and human perspective and data. So, really it's a working framework, but in essence, antibiotic use will select for resistance and help maintain resistance. That resistance could be in the pathogen you're trying to treat, or it could be in a commensal, whether that's in the throat, in the gut, on the skin. There could be transfer of resistance genes between the pathogen and commensals. That would complicate treatment in an animal, for example, that we're trying to treat. And these could transfer to people. Now, what really exemplifies this as a One Health issue is that instead of human at the bottom, I could put the word animal, and I'd be talking about people. It's exactly the same principle. Sometimes we use different language, but they're the same principles. And what this does is, this framework, it shows you in a strategy where there's opportunity for intervention and how that intervention could be measured. And in different countries and in different circumstances, part of your strategy should be to decide where to concentrate your efforts. And in essence, you should be looking for maximum return for minimum effort, because you fall into the trap of everything's important or could be important, and therefore you must try to do everything. Actually, I would argue you should have the courage to concentrate in particular areas. So, using this framework, what do we have? Well, if you prevent infection, you don't need to treat, so you don't need an antibiotic. So prevention can be all sorts of things. It can be infection control, it can be biosecurity for animals, it can be use of vaccines. And again, I would caution about language. Vaccines aren't an alternative to antibiotics. They're to prevent the need for use of antibiotics. Alternatives to antibiotics are other antibacterials or immunotherapy. Okay? They're not quite the same thing. There are a few therapeutic vaccines, but they're rare. So can you prevent the need? So you have healthier animals, healthier people, better nutrition, same for people and animals. And if you can, it doesn't matter how well you do that, there will still be some infection. So we need to improve how we use the antibiotics we have. Stewardship, that's what it means. Make better use of this valuable resource. And while we're doing that, can we use alternatives? And can we help encourage the development of alternatives or new antibiotics? And in fact, there are new antibiotic classes potentially in the pipeline. I think the market's not ready to receive them because it's a hard ask. In fact, what we're asking industry to do is to invest heavily, make something new, and then tell everybody not to use it. It's a conundrum. Personally, I think probably the biggest opportunity will be, as we understand the mechanisms of resistance better, we'll prevent resistance and bring old antibiotics back into use. It's not a novel concept. Clavulanic acid is a classic example. So I see that's where most new developments will happen. And even then, you will get some resistance. So how do you stop it spreading? Infection control. This we know little about, what happens in these complex ecosystems, about resistance exchanges. For transfer to humans, well, for zoonotics, we need zoonosis control. For foodborne pathogens, we need better food hygiene. And on top of all of this, and something I won't talk about now, but we can pick up in questions, of course, is in both for human and animal use, the antibiotics or resistance bacteria can get into the environment, and the environment can feed back at any point in this process. So that's the principle. And our UK 5-year strategy was based on those principles. And I'm going to just mention a couple and then concentrate on some with outcome and output measures. Of course, improve infection prevention and control, optimize prescribing, that's good stewardship. How do you do that? Well, you improve professional education and training. You need to get public engagement so they don't demand or expect an antibiotic. Can we help develop new drugs and treatments? That's a slow burn, particularly for new diagnostics. But I agree with Lord O'Neill. It is slow. There is a long lead-in time, but actually it's taking longer than it should. I think it needs a better strategic thinking and good enough as opposed to perfect. And of course, we've heard about the importance of surveillance, and I'll be showing you some of our surveillance data. And I fully endorse what was said. Surveillance has to be simple. It has to be fed back to be useful. It has to be used to monitor the impact of interventions. Surveillance is not long-term research. If you want to do that, then do a point prevalence study or do an enhanced surveillance for a period of time, but don't make it complicated. And don't get your researchers involved in developing the surveillance scheme, because they'll want everything, bells and whistles. And they want the material, all these lovely strains and bits of food. They just want to demand. So always get them to advise, but don't let them dictate. And what I'm going to comment on very briefly is strengthened international collaboration, the last one. It is a strong feature of the UK Action Plan. It was part of our plan to have strong international advocacy. And in simple terms, just like public health, if you want to prevent import of infection, resistant or not, you need to export good public health or good awareness of AMR and good practice and share it. And about half of our activities were on that global advocacy. And just some key ones, and you've heard about some of these, but the World Health Assembly, its declaration, and then charging the WHO, so it did that in 2014, and asked the WHO to produce an action plan, a global action plan, which then became a tripartite one with OIE and FAO. That came from a lot of advocacy and stimulation and leadership from the UK. Just as the United Nations General Assembly Declaration in 2016. And the reason that was wanted by the UK is we needed to make sure that people knew it wasn't just a health issue. It was an economic issue. It was a development goals issue. It was a broad range of issues. And you can't do that just through the health arena. You need to get the other government departments engaged. So that was the importance of that. And following that, we also had to get the environmental profile. Again, we drove the UN environmental declaration that was last year. And we've worked, of course, through G7, G20. At the G20, we had the agricultural ministers making a declaration, not just the health ministers doing it all the time. And you've heard about the O'Neill report, but the importance of that was showing the economic impact and the economic effects. So what I'm going to do now is look at 3 key measures of the many, and I'm not going to talk about all the other things that I've shown you, but I'm happy to pick any of them up in questioning. But the 3 key measures are sales, use, and resistance. They are the primary output and outcome markers of a plan. You can have all sorts of measures, you know, public awareness has gone up, public understanding hasn't, we're doing more surveillance, we're doing more of this. Yeah, but why are you doing it? You're doing it to reduce resistant infections. So you must have some end points to measure, and you must have some targets. It's not easy. So on sales, on the veterinary side, within the European Union, sales are collected. They're not collected on the human side. Actually, I think that's shocking, because it's easy to do. So the OIE is going around the world collecting sales data. We don't have that on the human side. And to get defined daily doses in low-income countries, really? You know, and how accurate will that data be? How can we compare one with the other? And what's the total impact of the amount of available antibiotics in the world? It's total sales, whatever it's used for. So we really do need to improve that. But at least on the animal side, we have total sales data. Our use data is a bit poorer than the human side, and I'll come to that in a moment. But as you'll see, for 2016, it takes 2 years for the data to come through and get published. The UK in red, we're doing pretty well. And everyone will argue, Sweden will say it's the best, lowest user of European Union countries, because Norway is not officially in the European Union, and neither is Iceland. So they'll say they're the best because they ignore those two. The Netherlands will say, well, Sweden doesn't have any animals really anyway, so it's easy for them. You know, Norway's only got fish and they vaccinate them all. Of course, there's a bit of politics and gaming. But in terms of intensively farmed countries, the UK does very well, Denmark does very well, Netherlands is pretty good. But as you'll see, this is not correct, is it? This should be a bell curve. You should not have these huge outliers down here. Any epidemiology of a large population size should be a bell curve, and you try to shift it one way or the other depending on your objectives. So really, we need to be targeting Cyprus, Italy, Spain, Portugal. They have the same European Union directives and actions, and yet their use is huge. And this isn't because they got a bigger animal population. These data are based on the denominator. Europe uses milligrams per PCU, or population correction unit, which in essence is milligrams per kilogram of meat raised. That's what it is. So the denominator's there. On the human side, where we have antibiotic use, UK still does pretty well, but would like to do better as well, and would like to be up here, particularly with some of the Nordic countries. But that is less skewed. It's still not a bell-shaped curve, but it's actually less skewed than the animal sales data. So how do we do in the UK? Well, for a long time, I haven't shown all the other data, for a long time we were around about 62 milligrams per kilogram. And genuinely, at this point, I was saying to my own staff that unless we start to see a reduction, I'm going to have to revise the strategy because it's not working. I knew it would take 2 or 3 years to kick in. The strategy was about engagement, getting the livestock sectors to own the problem, to follow some of the lead that the poultry sector did, to work with the retailers, with the farm assurance schemes, to protect them from the accusations from the human health people that it was all their fault, but yet still quietly in the room say, smell the coffee, you're not working properly. All of that, was it paying off? And then, thank God, we started to see a reduction. And at this point, we introduced the O'Neill target of 50 milligrams per kilogram as a target, as an ambition, and we exceeded it 2 years early. And this year, we came out at 37 milligrams. That's a 40% reduction. Now, I can tell you one thing. If you'd have said to the industry then that you'll achieve 40% reduction over this short time period, they'd have said, you're mad. Now they're looking for more. They've set their own targets. And that's the point we made as government. You know your business, we don't. You've now realised you can have less input costs to production and better reputations. Go sort it out. We'll help you and support you. And they come up with targets. There isn't actually a European target for milk production. They've had to create one. And they have. And again, we've heard it frequently, and you'll hear it frequently. More antibiotics are used in animals than people. Not true in most countries where you bother to collect the data and it's accurate. Never was true. Some people say it doesn't matter, it's the message that counts. It does matter. It mattered to the livestock industry. And in the UK, and nearly all European countries, use in livestock is lower than use in people. About 25 of the 28. So, now it moved in 2013 from about 54% to 40-something. It's now moved to 64-36, so it's about a third, and that includes companion animals, as well as some used for horses or companion animals or livestock. and 72% livestock only. So it's about a third now is used in livestock as a ratio. And sales of antibiotics, again, we can look at classes, and we do. And again, on the livestock side, it's primarily the older antibiotics are still very effective, the beta-lactams, trimethoprim, sulfonamides. And the important thing here is look at that. High priority, critically important antibiotics, 0.8% of total sales. It's minuscule. Minuscule. And we'll look at that. Fluoroquinolones, third and fourth generation, Kefs and colistin. Colistin's almost non-existent. And you can see over the years how fluoroquinolone use has decreased. Over the last year, 30%, 21% for third and fourth generations, 94% for colistin. And over the period from 2013, 55%, 32, 99%, there's hardly any used. I think 7 kilograms for the whole year for all livestock. No banning at all voluntary. Compared to humans, and again you can see, by and large, human use hasn't changed very much of these critical antibiotics, and they've probably gone up, and generally overall they've always gone down on the animal side. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, but of course there's more intensive medicine nowadays. And that's true also for other antibiotics. So we've looked at the high critically important ones, but tetracycline use has gone down 11%, beta-lactams, they've all gone down. And the importance of this is that you'll see we can also look by means of delivery, and by means of delivery, in use in water or in feed premixes has gone down. All antibiotic classes. Injectables has gone up, more directed use. So what we have is the complete opposite to the perfect storm. We have the sunny day. Total sales has gone down. It's gone down in all classes. It's gone down higher in the critically important antibiotics. It's gone down in mass medication routes, and it's going up in more directed use. It's a really healthy picture. So, just to finish now, if we look at use, because that's total sales, and that's the problem. So Denmark has one of the best systems of correcting actual use. That prescription data. We don't in the UK. So we know the industry itself is collecting its own data, and we've helped in some areas to create the databases, and that creates proficiency schemes. Farmers can see how they compare to other farmers of the same livestock. Classic proficiency scheme, and they're very powerful. So as these kick in, I think we'll see better use of antibiotics, even further better use. But if you look at the poultry industry, and we've heard how advanced they were, it's gone down quite dramatically in all areas. If we look at pigs, salmon, trout, dairy and beef, they've all set their own targets. It's gone down. For those who've been collecting data for longer within their own sectors, you can see it's gone down across the years, not just over 1 year. So fairly dramatic reductions, but that's in use. On the human side, it's also gone down, which is good. Not quite so dramatic, but it's still good. And one of the reasons there's more scope on the human side is the same in Hong Kong, it's the same around the world. The highest proportion of use is in the community. You know, and of the excellent posters I looked at the other day, they were superb. The one showing that in Hong Kong, private doctors plus other community use, again, is about 80% of all use. And it's strange because on the human side, the majority use is in the community, and the majority of serious resistance problems are in hospitals. And then that means you can have a massive reduction in use if you target the community, but you won't see much reduction in serious resistant infections. It's a bit of a conundrum. But I think there is scope for more because just like everywhere else, there is regional variation. So, and it's not due to demographics. It's not due to socioeconomic factors. It's actually prescribing practice and habit. So showing GPs how much they use compared to others now is a powerful marker to say, you could do better. And overall, we believe 20% of antibiotics in the community are inappropriately prescribed. That's a massive reduction. when 80% of all use is in the community. That's a massive reduction potential. And to finish now with resistance, I'm only going to pick a few. But if you look at, there's a European Union harmonised, that's sampling at the abattoir. And they alternate it every year. So in pigs, third generation cephalospore in use, and fluoroquinolones, it's very low, and it's stayed low. And the same is true with other animals. Carbapenem producing E. coli. Carbapenems aren't used, but you still need to look for the resistance mechanism. We don't see it. There's much more ESBL in animals, including poultry. But actually, the new molecular methods show they're not the same ones as the ones causing problems in people. So there's some interesting molecular epidemiology. You'll find that E. coli resistance, by and large, the overall pattern is that multiply sensitive, is susceptible to everything, is increasing. Multiply resistant is decreasing. So we are seeing outcome improvements. We're seeing it within animals over time. Poultry people have been doing it longer than the pig people, but we are seeing over time reduction in resistance within species. So it does show that you can have an impact. Again, that's the fully susceptible E. coli that I mentioned. Interestingly on humans, and these are the last couple of PowerPoints now in case people are getting anxious, but interestingly in humans, bloodstream infections, the resistance has been held. It hasn't gone up, hasn't gone down. People would have liked to have seen it gone down, but it's actually been stabilized. The ambition in the next action plan is to reduce it. So how did we move from advocacy into plans, the plans into actions, the actions into outputs, and the outputs into outcomes, and then get the outcomes to influence the plan? And we have independent evaluation of our progress against the plans, and we now have a new one that will be released in the new year. And really, it was the last two PowerPoints will show you this. Engagement. And not everybody is equally enthusiastic. And that's within professions, between professions, and the real trick is you need to get enough of these people so that all of these, a bit like a catalyst, suddenly become these. You must get people to drive it themselves. And from a One Health point of view, it needs to be seamless. It's not yet. It's not. There's a lot of talk about One Health. Many One Health reports are the animal and the human side put in the same cover. That's not One Health. It does need more integration. The UK does it well, could do better. And we're going to hear later this morning, and I'm looking forward to it, integrated surveillance, a proper One Health approach. So with that, thank you very much.